Hello, everyone. I am so happy to be introducing our next speaker. Priska Long is a priestess of Inanna, serving with the Temple of Inanna and Circle of Stars Mystery School. She has spent more than 30 years in the magical arts as a witch, priestess, and magician, initiating in multiple traditions. Priska studied indigenous art and spirituality at Arizona State University and went on to train as a life coach and minister. Her ministry serves pagans, polytheists, and all magical people seeking to connect with the divine.
Thank you, Inanna. Is everybody having a good Ishtar Fest? Yay. Today, I'm going to speak with you about the myth of Inanna and Enki. And rather than having a slideshow or anything like that, I'm actually going to offer you a link to a page on the ETCSL so you can follow along with the translation of the tablets that I'm going to be referring to. So I'm going to put that in the chat. The myth of Inanna and Enki is very well known. It's the one in which Inanna received the May from Enki. So that link takes you to the translation of this that you can find on the electronic text corpus of Sumerian literature. So if you want to follow along line by line, you can. So most of us are familiar with this myth through the work of Samuel Noah Kramer and Diane Wolkstein. Samuel Noah Kramer was an Assyriologist in the 20th century who was largely responsible for bringing Inanna's stories and stories of Sumer in general into pop culture, into the popular understanding. Excuse me. And he worked with Diane Wolkstein to create her performance and eventually the book, Inanna, Queen of Heaven and Earth, Her Songs and Poems from Sumer. So now Wolkstein was not an Assyriologist. So it is through Kramer and through his lens that we have come to know this story. And I include myself in that we. And it wasn't until I began directly studying the actual translations and tablets and cuneiform transliterations that I came to know that the story that the interpretation of this story that most of us have is actually completely wrong. It's not supported by the tablets. And I was really shocked to hear this. And what I found is a very different story, which gives a very different character to Inanna than most people believe. So this myth is typically interpreted as a metaphor for a transfer of political power or political ascendancy from Enki's city of Eridu to Inanna's city of Uruk. It's an explanation of Uruk's political ascension and Eridu's political decline. And that is absolutely an accurate interpretation. In this interpretation, the transfer of the May, the divinely decreed attributes of civilization, represents Uruk's growth in economic might and political power. And this is an absolutely accurate analysis, but it's not the only analysis. And indeed, part of this myth is also interpreted as referring to the annual floods of Uruk when the rivers rose. And so that's one explanation. That's one interpretation of this myth, but again, it's not the only one. Ancient Mesopotamian literature relied very heavily on metaphor and double entendre. There were always multiple meanings of almost everything that was written in ancient Mesopotamian literature. So this myth has multiple layered meanings, and I'm going to talk about one of them today. So Kramer, while a respected Assyriologist, was prone to fanciful or biased misinterpretations, such as one such has been responsible for the persistent belief that Lilith is a character in Mesopotamian mythology, that the goddess Lilith is a character in Mesopotamian mythology, when actually she is not. But that was his kind of fanciful misinterpretation of the story of Inanna and the Halub tree. So in the popular culture understanding of this myth, which comes from Kramer, comes the belief that Inanna obtained the May through theft or trickery. In this version of the myth, Inanna gets Enki drunk and uses his intoxication to trick him into letting her take the May. And this is often described as Inanna stealing the May from Enki. I personally don't know exactly why Kramer chose to embellish the story in this way, because it turns out I was really surprised when I started reading the direct translations and found that there is no theft and no trickery anywhere in this story. So I don't know why Kramer chose this embellishment, but to be quite honest, I suspect misogyny. And the reason I suspect that is because of what Kramer wrote about the myth, of his own words. So this is his book, The Sumerians, Their History, Culture, and Character. And I'd like to read a little bit from this book to you about Inanna. And he in particular says, not all Inanna myths concern Dumuzid. There is one, for example, which relates how the goddess, through trickery, obtained the divine laws, the May which govern mankind and its institutions. So first, right there, he says that trickery. He also says later on, if she can obtain these May by fair means or foul, her glory will indeed be unsurpassed. And then in the very next sentence, he says, he's talking about the story, and he says, as she approaches the Abzu of Eridu, Enki, no doubt taken in by her charms, calls his messenger Isimud. So this is really a pattern of using dismissive and misogynist language to refer to Inanna. Now, I think one reason that this interpretation of the myth has been so popular is that there has been an attempt to cast Inanna as a trickster god. I think that especially Western pagans really like the idea of a trickster god. And so they wanted to cast her in that way. So this idea that Inanna tricked Enki may be one of the reasons that this interpretation is so popular. It's also possible that people wanted Inanna's role to conform more to that of the Greek Prometheus, who, stole fire from the gods, as they say. Exactly. I really believe that Kramer, from what Kramer wrote here, I believe that he was basically implying that the only way that a woman could come into great power was through nefarious means and through using her physical charms to influence someone, which is pretty freaking sexist, right? So in their version of the myth, she gets Enki drunk and tricks him, and this is often described as theft. But whatever his motivation for this interpretation, Kramer missed the deeper meanings that would be visible to someone who is initiated in a magical tradition. I believe that a close examination of this myth demonstrates that in addition to a seasonal tale of the flood, in addition to being a tale of political ascendance, this story is also a tale of initiation. And I think most of you know what initiation is, but if you don't, initiatory ritual is a rite of passage that facilitates, or initiation is a rite of passage that recognizes or facilitates a change in your status, in the status of an individual who is the initiate. Initiatory rituals usually include a task that must be accomplished or a difficulty that must be overcome. And this is usually described as the ordeal of the initiation. And they also include a transfer of mystical knowledge which is often called the transmission of the gnosis. And we see all of these elements present in this myth if you look at the original text. So I highly recommend, following along with the original text, if you will. And so the analysis that I'm going to offer here relies upon these transliterations and interpretations at the electronic text corpus of Sumerian literature. And if you click upon the blue letters that show the verses, they will, that will take you actually to the same line in the transliteration of the logograms. So you can actually look at the transliteration of Sumerian to get an idea of what was actually written there and what they intended. And just give me one moment. I'm going to turn off chat previews because they're so distracting. Okay. So I want to stress that nothing I am offering you that I'm saying is a part of this myth is based on my unsubstantiated personal gnosis, but my analysis is based upon what I know about ancient Mesopotamian religion and also my decades of experience in magical practice and study. So the myth begins with Inanna clothing herself and going out to the sheepfold to visit the shepherd. And she declares that after she has met with the shepherd, she will go to Eridu to meet Enki, to the primordial waters of the Abzu. So Eridu was Enki's holy city, as Uruk was Inanna's holy city, but Enki's temple was called the Abzu, the house of the Abzu, the Abzu. And the Abzu, the subterranean water of life, is where, magically speaking or spiritually speaking, Enki resides. So what this indicates to us is that this story concerns both the material realm, this real world we live in, where Eridu was a city and Uruk was a city, and you could travel between them, but also a metaphysical world. Because when you go to Enki's temple, the Abzu, this physical building, you are also in the metaphysical space that is the Abzu, the primordial waters. And Mesopotamians understood culturally that the temple is a physical place where you can enter the metaphysical Abzu. Just as they understood, just as their literature had multiple meanings, they also understood what we would call a concept of multiple coexisting realities, which is not a phrase that they used. So significantly, Inanna begins the story traveling alone and on foot to Eridu. Enki sees that she's coming. He is the one of exceptional knowledge, and he knows already the intentions of the gods. So he directs his servant to welcome her as a guest and equal to Enki himself. He is to prepare cake, he is to prepare cool water, pour beer for her, let her wash herself and make her comfortable as she would be, he says, at the home of one of her girlfriends. So Isimud, of course, did what he was told. He welcomed her and he invited her to join Enki at the holy table of On. So at this point in the story, Inanna is the candidate for initiation. A queen would typically travel in a litter accompanied by servants and guards. But as a candidate for initiation, Inanna walks to Eridu all by herself. Enki welcomes her as a guest, and this is one of many examples in ancient Near Eastern literature of the host-guest relationship, which is also known as the law of hospitality. Incidentally, ancient Mesopotamia's codified laws did not apparently include a version of the law of hospitality. There was no actual municipal law about hospitality. But what we see from ancient Mesopotamian stories is that the law of hospitality was intensely important, and it still is. So in this relationship, it's one of obligation that the host and the guest are both obligated. The host is obligated to share with the guest what they have, everything they have to share, whether it's food or a place to sleep. And they're also obligated not to kill or rob or harm the guest. And the guest is obligated not to kill or rob or harm their host. This host-guest relationship was found throughout the ancient world, and it is also central to some initiatory mysteries in certain Western esoteric lineages. So the initiatory nature of the candidate as a guest persists to this day in Western esotericism. So if Inanna, as a guest, were to actually steal from Enki, she would be committing an enormous offense, one which could be answered with violence, like she would be. In other stories, we see that when people violate the host-guest relationship, they are frequently beaten within an inch of their lives. So that right there says that if she were to, that this is not something Inanna would do as a guest. She would not transgress this way. So this is the point where Enki and Inanna begin drinking together. Let me scroll down a little bit. Oh, sorry. They're drinking beer and wine, and the translation says that they began a competition. Now, for some reason, Diane Wolkstein translated this or decided to represent this as a drinking contest. But the Sumerian word used here is adamin, and that's usually interpreted actually as an argument or a debate. Also, all of my information on this comes from the online Sumerian dictionary, and I can provide a link to that as well. So the contest they were having was not a drinking contest, but it appears to have been a verbal or philosophical contest. A discussion about philosophy or beliefs or something else upon which they either disagreed or had agreed to disagree. And at this point, about 35 lines are missing. So we don't know the specifics of their argument, but we do know that it was not a drinking contest. We know that it was a debate. And when the story picks up again, Enki is giving Inanna the May. Pardon me. This part of their conversation is the most significant. Because, at least in our look at this, because Enki gives the May to Inanna freely of his own choice. There's no coercion, there's no trickery, there's no theft. And he gives them using a specific affirmation. In the name of my power, in the name of my Abzu, I will give this to holy Inanna, my daughter. And with each May, he repeats this. With each set of May, he gives them to her in sets. And as he gives her each set, he repeats this over and over. Ever since Kramer, this story has been passed on over and over to claim that Inanna stole the May or tricked Enki. We don't see that at all. There's no deception. There's no theft. What we see is that he gives them to her. And every time he gives her a set of them, she says, I receive them. So he says, in the name of my power, in the name of my Abzu, I will give the May to holy Inanna, my daughter. And she says, I receive it. Enki is the god of magic. And two things are happening here. When he is giving her the May, I believe that this affirmation, which is essentially an oath, is a magical formula. In the name of my power, in the name of my Abzu, I will give the May to holy Inanna, my daughter. But also in calling her his daughter, he is establishing a relationship of lineage. Enki is the initiator who is initiating the candidate, Inanna. He is establishing that he is someone looking over her. So every time he gives her a set of the May, he repeats this formula, this incantation. He's not just handing her the May, he's ritually endowing her with the May. This is the transmission of knowledge that is essential to an initiatory rite. And in her turn, she acknowledges each of the May that he gives to her. And then another about 30 to 40 lines are missing. The next thing we read is that Enki calls his vizier, Isimud, And he says, hey, has Inanna left yet? And it does say at this point that he is sobering up. It says the beer is running out of him. And so he asks Isimud, has Inanna left yet? And Isimud says, well, yes, actually, she's on the boat of heaven and she's on her way back to Uruk. So notice that while Inanna arrived on foot and alone, she's leaving in a mighty ship. And to be clear, the what we call the boat of heaven, which is commonly translated boat of heaven, it's actually, the actual translation of it would be ship. It's a big boat. It's not like a coracle. It's not a kayak. It's a big freaking boat. You might consider it a barge. So Inanna is on the ship of heaven. She's headed to Uruk in a mighty ship, and she is no longer on foot. She is no longer humbled. She is sailing away as befits her station. So then Enki asks Isimud, where are the May? And he asks about each one, each set, and to each question, Isimud says, well, you gave them to your daughter Inanna. So again, a large portion of the tablet is missing here. And when the story continues, Enki tells Isimud to take the May back from Inanna. So Isimud goes to Inanna, who is slowly traveling on the ship of heaven, and he tells her that he has an important message for her from Enki, which is that Inanna can go, but the May have to return to Eridu. And Inanna refuses to comply. She questions Isimud, and she says, is Enki breaking his sacred word? She asks if Enki is breaking his sacred word when he pledged the May to her in the name of his power and the name of his Abzu. And she points out that if he forces her to return the May, not only is he breaking his word, but he's sending someone else to do his dirty work, which is, in her opinion, dishonest. And she says, has he sworn falsely by the name of his power and by the name of the Abzu? Has he duplicitously sent you to me as a messenger? So it's like, not only is Enki, kind of screwing her over here and breaking his word, but he doesn't even have the courage to do it himself. He's sending Isimud, right? Isimud is not in a great position here. So I really have a lot of sympathy for Isimud in this story. Inanna outranks him. So she doesn't have to do anything he tells her to do. But he has to follow Enki's orders, whether or not they are morally right or just. So again and again, Isimud returns to Enki to tell him that Inanna is still traveling. And Enki sends him again and again back to Inanna with reinforcements to try to get her to give up the May. Over and over, Inanna responds by pointing out that Enki made her a sacred, solemn pledge and that he cannot break his word. And she calls her own vizier, Ninshubur, to help her continue her journey. What we see in this portion of the myth is Inanna defending her right to possess the May. Isimud pressures her in Enki's name to surrender the May, but she defends her right to possess them, and she holds Enki accountable for his oath. She knows her rights and she defends them. She understands the mores by which she and Enki are both bound, and she won't be threatened or frightened into abandoning these values. Isimud approaches Inanna this way 7 times. 7 is, of course, the number of Venus. But in Kabbalah, it's also the number of completeness, which is why the world was created in 7 days. And it's also the number of quests for knowledge. And this seems very significant to me because on this journey, Inanna is herself on a quest to bring particular knowledge, the May, to Uruk. Excuse me. 7 times, she is attacked by various forces, such as giants and fish and water spirits. 7 times, she refuses to give up the May, and 7 times she escapes these forces and makes her way back to Uruk. Thus, she successfully completes her initiatory ordeal. I believe that in this portion of the myth, this is the ordeal, that if Inanna had surrendered the May to Isimud, she would have failed the ordeal and failed the initiation. But Inanna, now the initiate, reaches Uruk with the May. Both Inanna and Ninshubur call for rejoicing in the city and a great festival with lots of food. There's a pretty good description, like a pretty detailed description of all the food they're going to eat, which I think is so cute. It's like a Memorial Day barbecue. So Isimud goes back and reports to Enki that Inanna has reached Uruk. And here we have Enki's response is fragmented. But what we can see is that he repeatedly expresses admiration for Inanna. And the particular logogram that is used in that part of the story means wonder in the context of awe. You know, he is in awe of what she has done. He is in wonder. And he repeatedly expresses, you can see over and over, they say the word admiration, admiration, admiration. And then he says that he will establish a place for her in his realm, the Absu. So this is not the reaction of an angry authoritarian who has been stolen from or tricked. This is the reaction of an initiator proud of his initiate success. He admires her accomplishment, and he is establishing a place for her in his temple. And by doing that, he is recognizing her change of status. She has now proven that she is his equal. So it's clear to me that the 7 attacks upon Inanna during her journey were tests. Those are the ordeal. Had she surrendered the May, she would have failed the test because she would have shown that she was unworthy to possess them. But because she defended her rights, she passed the test and completed her ordeal, proving her worthiness. So does this mean that Inanna was a human being who was a long ago initiate of a magical organization? No, it doesn't. There are many theories about the origins of gods, and Mesopotamian myths are not meant to be read literally. But it means that we can understand Inanna as a goddess of initiation, setting an example for us to follow. So I mentioned earlier that every myth has multiple meanings. And that's true. But not every meaning is meant to be understood by every reader. The initiatic significance was probably meant only for the understanding of the priesthood. It's possible that this layer of meaning was used within the temples to communicate the virtues of an initiate, or even to guide a candidate through an initiatory ritual. I personally think it's possible that a candidate could have been instructed to either read this story or have it chanted or read to them in order to instruct them on the proper ways that initiate should behave. Or it could have also been used as an actual template for an initiatory ritual, bringing people into a position within the temple. So right now, we can't know. We don't know how this narrative was used in the ancient world. But we can use it as a basis for crafting our own modern day initiatory rituals. And we can also look for initiatic themes in Inanna's other stories, because that can further our devotional work toward her. It can further our understanding of her, and it can further our own process of initiation as magicians. And I think that's it. Zami, Inanna, thank you very much for listening. And I'm going to open up the chat to see if anybody has questions, or if anybody has questions that aren't in the chat.
I don't think there's questions yet in the chat, but maybe somebody wants to ask one. Anyone have a question? Mara, do you want to say something?
Yes. So that was very insightful and enlightening. And as someone who is not familiar with initiatory or any sort of this sort of ritual, I've never done that before. It was very, very educational. I was going to ask, do you think there are? Well, it just seems like from my very limited knowledge that the descent of Inanna maybe has some element of initiatory like undertones. I don't know.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And I mean, of course, that one is the most obvious, because Inanna goes into into the underworld. She sets out as a powerful being and has to surrender all of her power in a very ritualized way in order to enter the underworld. And so, yes, I absolutely believe that story has an initiatory component as well. And also, interestingly, Wolkstein, so the Sumerian words for ear and mind were the same word. So when that story begins, it actually says that Inanna set her ear to the great below. And Kramer actually said that it was the way you would imagine a horse would kind of swing its ear towards something it wants to focus on and pay attention to. That's exactly what it meant, to set her. So Inanna set her ear to the great below. She focused her mind on the great below. And I think that's very significant. She wasn't just, going on vacation. She set her mind on the great below, and the mind is the seat of consciousness. So yeah, I absolutely think there's so much initiatory significance there. And at some point, I will be going through probably next year, I will be going through the original transliterations of that story for the Circle of Inanna. For and with the Circle of Inanna. The Circle of Inanna is a group of women who are devoted or otherwise in relationship with Inanna, and we meet once a month. And they get pretty much all of my work first. They've actually been with me over the last year while I've been developing this analysis. They've heard it at different stages in its development. And so if you're a woman who wants to be involved in something like that, you should contact me. You can find me on Facebook and talk to me about that, because we do that once a month. And next year, they will be the first ones to get my probable exploration of the descent myth. This year, we're doing We're doing a different May every month.
All right, we have another question from Lindsay. So let's see if I can put you in this. Oh, crap.
Hello. Yeah, forgive me, I'm in bed because I haven't been very well, and it's quite late here in London as well. I absolutely love this Priska, and I haven't seen it like you've seen it, but I've almost seen it like that. But so people are very enchanted by the idea of Inanna stealing the May. And so I've had a lot of resistance in seeing it the other way. But what I wanted to ask you about was the role of Nintuba, because she fights off some of the demons and saves the boat for Inanna this is in the Kramer and Wolkstein translation. And I haven't had the moment to just go and check that in the link you gave. But I wanted to ask if she does have the same role, and if an initiate can have a helper like this.
It's not entirely clear what her role is. What we do know is that when Isimud sends people after Inanna, she calls Nintuber. And she says, "Come, my good minister of Eanna, my fair-spoken minister. Water has never touched your hand. Water has never touched your foot." And I think that this implies that Ninshubur has some kind of power that makes him able to resist the attacks of the water creatures and the creatures of the Abzu who are being sent after Inanna. Now, it doesn't say actually that that Ninshubur fights them off, but it does. But she does call Ninshubur and says, "Water has never touched your hand. Water has never touched your foot." Now, in most initiatory rituals, initiates often do have helpers. The officers in an initiation, there will be the initiator, and then there will also be other officers of the initiation, the other people doing the stuff that makes the initiatory ritual happen, right? And like, for example, in the Disney story of Cinderella, all the little mice and birds that make her dress would be officers in her initiation, right? So, so I would say that Ninshubur serves almost like an officer. I have seen initiatory rituals where, for example, as the initiate is moving along some sort of a path, someone steps in to give them an item that they will need later in the initiation, or to tell them a secret they will need later on. And I would say that Ninshubur's role as an officer is really similar to this. And I would say that Isimud is also, even if unwittingly, serving as an officer.
Okay, that's good. You see, I know that Ninshubur's gender is different in different texts and at different times. I have to say that I'm not giving up on Ninshubur being female, and that she's really important to me for many, many years as a lesbian. She's been very important to me as a devoted servant of Inanna. And Kramer does have this thing where it says, "Once you were the queen of the East," and I don't know if that's right or not, because I've seen lots of dodgy things in Kramer, like Lilith and everything. Yeah. But thank you for, I mean, I got to stick with what is important to me and what is part of my spirituality with Ninshubur. So, but I don't think that what you're saying really contradicts it. But I think what you've done here is absolutely brilliant. And I'm really, really pleased to have heard it and honored that you've brought it here. And I'm so pleased that even though I've been quite ill and I didn't know if I could make this festival, that I've made it. And I think it's absolutely wonderful that you've found this out, because there was something wrong with the myth as it was being propagated.
Thank you. Tell everyone.
I will.
Like, I'm serious. Like, I feel like now whenever someone says something about Inanna stealing the May, I feel really compelled to say she didn't steal anything. And a few years ago, I said that to someone and he said, "Well, Enki asked for them back." Like, as though she was somehow obligated to do whatever Enki told her to do, like as though Enki had authority over her, And I thought that was really interesting, the assumptions that people bring their own gendered assumptions to this story, such as that Inanna has to do what Enki tells her or she's stealing.
I know. Yeah, I mean, I've done workshops on this because I do a thing where the people who come to the workshop are going to meet Enki, guided by Inanna, and they are going to ask for their own May that they need in their life. Yeah. And it's been very powerful for people. And I don't think we ever saw people as really stealing. So it really fits with what my work has been with this myth. But one of the things that I know people will resist, or some people might resist over, is last time I did this workshop, someone who was a sex worker, was very excited by the idea that Inanna was being in her holy sex worker role of seducing this man to give her the May. And I know she's gonna be disappointed when I tell her it wasn't that, but she might like the initiatory side of it. So yeah, I will tell everyone.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I really think that this is a moment when we can really change the narrative about Inanna. I think that this is really one of the reasons this misinterpretation has persisted is misogyny.
Absolutely.
And so I think we absolutely, as we can see, some people are still very, very attached to this misinterpretation of the story. And yeah, absolutely. So now whenever anyone brings it up, I just feel really compelled to be like, do you know, I used to think that too, but it turns out it's totally not true.
I'm still going to keep exploring in the light of what you've told me, because, you know, I have a theory that while Inanna goes to the netherworld during the inferior conjunction of Venus and the Sun, I believe that the journey to the Absu is during the superior the superior conjunction with the Sun, which lasted for much longer. I mean, the inferior one is about a week, but this one can last 6 weeks at the latitude of Eridu and Uruk.
That's
So
really interesting because
yeah, I was going to do a presentation on it this time, but I'm not well enough. So I'll do it next first.
I hope you will, because Seth Gonzalez, an Assyriologist, says that the end of the story, when all of the all of the creatures of the Abzu are pursuing Inanna, is meant to describe the floods, the annual floods coming into Uruk, and that's the river kind of running up. And so I think that it would be really interesting if that seasonally coincided with this conjunction. So I'd really love to hear about
No,
that.
it doesn't. The conjunctions, I'm a friend of Seth's, and he's actually read my paper on it, which was, you know, the book that was going to happen and may still happen. I wrote about it for that. And he's got my, he's been very supportive, but it's not an annual thing. I think that Inanna's festivals, both some were annual, like Kin Inanna, obviously, some were annual, but I think that some went on the cycle of Venus, which is, I think it's 586 days. So it recurs, what is 586 days? About 2.5 years or something like that. So it recurs when Venus, and it's very, very visual because Venus is so big in the sky at some times and then disappears at other times. It's very, very much, we tend to think everything has to be seasonal and annual, but if you lived in a place where you could see the planets and the stars very easily, as they did, and didn't have street lights and stuff like that, they would be very aware that Venus, the planet, was disappearing. I mean, I think that quite a lot of Inanna myths, I think Inanna and I can't remember his name because I always repress it, the rapist gardener,
Me too, I always forget his name.
It's Shukalituda. I think that is also an astral myth connected with the planet's movements. So, and other people think that too. Some Assyriologists think that too. So I'm going to now look at Inanna and Enki and my theory about the disappearance of the planet, because I think what happens, you see, is that the planet disappears and people say, where has Inanna gone? Where has she gone? And the answer is she's either gone to the Absu at superior conjunction or she's gone to the netherworld at inferior conjunction. So yeah, I'll talk about that next year.
Please do.
And I'm so happy that you've done this work. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You're brilliant. You're really brilliant.
Oh, thank you, Lindsay. That really means a lot. Thank you very much. I know you've been doing this work for a very long time. I mean, I feel so really honestly blessed just to be in this room with all of you. So thank you so much. Are there any more questions, comments, anything anyone wants to share?
I will just, echo what everyone's been saying about just kudos to you for doing this work, for putting in the work. And I think this is a perfect example of how we need to always be doing our research and being aware of the type of research that we're doing. As time grows and we are learning more, that's probably going to change how we are seeing things. And sometimes we have to, maybe be a little vulnerable in changing how we've been perceiving things. Lindsay, I hear you clearly, like with an introvert means something very special to you. And that's, I think that's a personal decision that we all make, how we're going to interpret some things. But it's really so important to be aware that we're always looking at these ancient texts, which are broken, and we don't speak this language anymore. We are always looking at these through our own lenses, and we have to be careful about the lenses that we're getting information from sometimes. And just that changing of maybe what we've always believed in, that in and of itself can be an initiatory process as well.
I have a question.
Absolutely.
I have a question. Could the Sumerians distinguish between Venus's inferior and superior conjunctions?
Oh, absolutely.
Really?
Absolutely. They complete, and when we've got something called the oh God, I can't remember, the Venus tablet of, and I can't remember the name, but it's a tablet that was copied over and over through thousands of years. And it was observations of Venus. And it proves for how long they were noting and understanding the disappearances of Venus and their regularity, because they do occur really regularly, and they actually inscribe a pentacle over 5 years, I think it is, 8 years. I can't quite, sorry, I'd have to look at my figures, but I actually did a calendar for when all the superior and inferior conjunctions were happening only for the book that didn't happen yet. Only it's getting worn out because I wrote it about, I don't know, 4 years ago, and we'll be using up the calendar. But it does go into the future as well, and I can always do more as well. But yeah, no, sorry, to get back to the Sumerians, they didn't, people have said really rude things about them, like, oh, they didn't really have any astronomy, they didn't understand the zodiac, that only came with the Babylonians. Their astronomy was planetary, and it was extremely developed. And I think that there are lots of other planetary myths, like Nergal going to the netherworld is to do with the disappearance of Mars and the way Mars moves in its cycle. So there's lots of things like that. And the Greeks took it from the, not from the Sumerians, though. They took it from the Akkadians much later. And that's why they think the Greeks thought that Hermes was a psychopomp and went to the underworld, because Mercury also disappears in a regular cycle, and he does it very, very often, which is why people are always talking about Mercury being retrograde, because Mercury is popping backwards and forwards a lot. So the Sumerians instituted this study of planetary movement that has influenced world mythology, at least in the Middle East and Europe.
Hey, Lindsay, you have got to talk about that next year. We're not letting you off the hook. And and Laurel, if you're interested, we're doing a Venus retrograde discussion tomorrow evening. I think it's at 6 o'clock Eastern time tomorrow. So if you're interested, that
Will
would
it be
be a fantastic-
recorded? Because I have
Yes.
another commitment. so I'll
yes,
have to-
everything's
yeah,
being recorded.
okay.
Except for
Okay,
the
thanks.
dedication ceremony. So yes,
Okay.
you can definitely listen. It's really good. It's actually pre-recorded already because Shu Yap in Australia, it's like I don't know, 2 o'clock, and I don't know, it's very late or early or something.
Yeah, they're
right
on
now.
the next day already.
Yeah, they're on the next day. So yeah, it's like 4 o'clock in the morning or something right now. Any other questions or comments before we wrap up for the dinner break? And thank you,
just-
Priska. That was awesome.
Thank
I
you.
just-
Thank you all for listening and being here. I appreciate it so much. And several of my sisters in the circle are here today, and I want to thank y'all in particular for listening to me babble about this kind of thing once a month and supporting my work. And yeah, and really helping me to refine my ideas. You know, every woman in our circle is like incredibly smart and badass, and I'm so grateful for your brains. Thank you for sharing them with me and your hearts.
Thank you, Priska.
We love you, Priska.
Oh, I love you. So love us.
All right, so more of this love fest later. So after the dinner break, we're having a talk on, I guess I should hang on. I can't, someday I'm going to learn how to do things at the same time, but I can't really. So after the break, let me stop the recording.